Channel 6 Action News. We're earning our reputation, one story at a time.
An American A-10 over Iraqi positions. First pictures of the battle at the border. This is a special edition of the CBS Evening News, part of our continuing coverage of Showdown in the Gulf. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. American warplanes combed the sky over Iraq today, trying desperately to wipe out Saddam Hussein's mobile Scud missiles. Israel braced for more strikes and warned of retaliation that could widen the war. President Bush praised Israel for not retaliating up to now. The president promised, in his words, the darndest search and destroy mission ever undertaken to eliminate the threat to Israel. Over Iraq and Kuwait, U.S. warplanes have now launched more than 2,000 raids against Iraqi troops and military targets. That's the heaviest bombing since World War II. But the U.S. commanders warn that Iraq's military power has not been destroyed. There could still be a long way to go in this war. 4 U.S. planes have been confirmed lost now. 7 crewmen officially listed as missing. Israel held its fire against Iraq today, even under the threat of more missile strikes. Tom Fenton, the first to report last evening's attack on Tel Aviv, is there again tonight. Tom?
Dan, there are 2 questions on everybody's mind tonight. When will the next missile strike, and when will Israel retaliate? Everybody expects another missile attack before dawn. The only question is when. Already, we've had 2 alerts. The sirens wailed again in the already empty streets of Tel Aviv and other towns and cities at 8:45 local time. That was the signal for everyone to go into prepared sealed rooms and don chemical warfare protective clothing.
Possible additional Scud missile firing. Those reports are unconfirmed. We're checking on them now. The only reason we're mentioning it is it gives you some idea of the tension in the air in and around the Persian Gulf and, of course, in Israel, where Scuds actually confirmed hit last night. So we'll keep you up to date as the hour goes along on what we can confirm, what we can't confirm. But as we've said so many times before, it's a time for caution, a time to check and double check any such report, and a time not to believe everything that you hear. CBS News correspondent Martha Teichner has been out in the Saudi desert with U.S. Army troops as they mass for a possible ground assault on Kuwait. We've just received her report, and here it is.
Daybreak on day 2 of war. The Army's 7th Corps on what's called stand-to duty, watching for anything suspicious, any sign of terrorist attack, wearing their chemical warfare suits. 2 overnight chemical alerts coincided with the missile attack on Israel and the attempt on Saudi Arabia. Here, precautions are taken seriously.
Let's go!
The firing is still only for practice, but 7th Corps expects to move to the Iraqi-Kuwaiti border within days, as soon as the ground war begins in earnest. It is the largest Army unit in the Gulf, moved here from Germany. When they heard that an American Patriot missile had destroyed the Iraqi Scud fired at Saudi Arabia, there were cheers here, the kind you hear at a football game when your team scores a touchdown. There are few second thoughts, few doubts about the war in which these soldiers will be key players.
We're right here on the line, ready to go and do what needs to be done, and we want to ensure that we do the necessary things.
Survival is part of the daily business of the 7th Corps, the nuisance factor of every alert, the annoyance of living in a chemical warfare suit, secondary to safety. The attitude here, better to be packed in underground shelters, breathing through a gas mask, than miss the chance to liberate Kuwait, to fight the Iraqis. Martha Teichner with the 7th Army Corps in northeast Saudi Arabia near the Iraqi border.
While American bombers pounded Iraq and Kuwait for a second straight day today, Israel girded for more Iraqi missile attacks. In Saudi Arabia at this hour, there is the report of 1 alert. I emphasize an alert. That doesn't mean anything has happened there in Saudi Arabia, and we're checking on that and staying in touch with it. President Bush condemned Iraq for what he called a, quote, terroristic attack last night against Israel, and he thanked the Israeli government for not striking back last evening when the missiles first hit Tel Aviv and Haifa and some other places in Israel. Our State Department correspondent Bill Plant has the story of the international alarm that sounded and the diplomatic response that followed that Iraqi strike. Bill?
Dan, the Israelis are signaling that they will definitely retaliate for that raid.
And even though they haven't done it yet, that makes this a very anxious time for U.S. diplomacy. For weeks now, the administration has worried about just exactly this problem: what to do, how to hold the coalition together when Saddam Hussein has made good on his promise to attack Israel. Just a few minutes after the Iraqi missiles struck Israel, U.S. AWACS planes detected Israeli aircraft lifting off, perhaps for a retaliatory strike against Baghdad. Working out of the White House Command Center, Secretary of State Baker tried to reassure Arab members of the coalition, calling the ambassadors of Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Syria. He also called the Israeli ambassador, and that led to 2 conversations with Israeli Prime Minister Shamir. In an exchange described as polite and friendly, Baker urged Shamir not to retaliate and promised him that the U.S. would move aggressively to clean out Iraq's mobile missile launchers. The Israeli planes did not strike Iraq, but Shamir gave Baker the same answer he had given last week to Deputy Secretary Eagleberger, and the same answer the Israeli ambassador gave reporters.
Israel reserves the right to respond in any way it would deem fit.
And now Israel's defense minister says that it will certainly retaliate, but it hasn't yet. And that seems to be the key to the understanding between Washington and Jerusalem: timing. Israel does not give up its right to retaliate. It just doesn't say when it's going to do it. And that gives Israel domestic political cover, and it spares the U.S., at least for now, real problems with its Arab allies. Dan?
Thanks, Bill. Praise for and pressure on Israel not to retaliate for the Iraqi Scud missile attacks was also coming from Capitol Hill today. Correspondent Phil Jones, who spent years covering the Congress for us, is up on Capitol Hill again tonight with our report about that. Phil?
Dan, congressional politicians are always making speeches that are supposed to be interpreted as messages, but many times you have to read between the lines to get the real message. Today, one of those unspoken messages was sent to Israel.
Without objection.
On the House floor, members were praising Israel.
The Israeli government has shown admirable restraint.
What other nation in the world would lay down its right to self-defense after a wanton missile attack?
In its unprecedented restraint following the attack, Israel has certainly gone the extra mile in support of our overall objectives in the Persian Gulf.
But Congress also wanted to say, Israel, don't retaliate, period, even though it may be totally justified.
If it were to be a major attack upon Iraq involving civilian casualties, then that very well could turn some of the coalition members against.
But I feel sad that so many people are going to die. And I feel confused if this war is either for oil or it's just to help, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia.
I've heard a lot of different opinions on stuff, and it gets me really mixed up.
Well, I started a diary on my computer, and that just helps me get, a lot of my feelings sorted out and stuff like that.
Even if people are unhappy, I think they'll be happy later on that we destroyed Saddam Hussein's army.
We can't really pray for peace. I mean, obviously, a lot of people wanted peace, but it didn't happen. I think that all we can do is pray for the soldiers, pray that not a lot of people get killed, pray that the families can stay together.
We're trying to help our children cope, said a grown-up here, partly just by listening to them. Children don't know better as they grow older, a man once wrote. They simply know more. Richard Roth, CBS News, Los Angeles.
And that's the news from our rapidly changing world tonight. We will, of course, be back on the air immediately to bring you any important late-breaking developments in the Mideast crisis, if there are any, throughout the evening. A reminder, coming up at 8 o'clock, 7 Central and Mountain Time, we're going to have a special broadcast on Showdown in the Gulf. That'll be just about a half hour from now. So Dan Rather for the CBS Evening News. See you again soon on our special broadcast.